are talking Two Witches. And this is actually an anthology movie, although it does have the same director and creative team. And is clearly about two witches. So this being an anthology movie, a lot of them tend to have like, 5, 6 stories, this thing. This one only has 2, which kind of gives it somewhat of a unique flavour to an anthology movie. Let's talk about the story and we'll kind of get into what I think works and does not work with this film. So clearly, obviously we have 2 different kind of tales here, although they both kind of clearly involve witches, although there is some connective tissue between the 2 of them. So it does feel like this, although it is an anthology technically speaking, it kind of feels like it does feel like a through story. The first one focuses on a couple where the woman is pregnant and they're going to see another couple who is actually the kind of the connective tissue between both the stories for like kind of a weekend away. And the woman is pregnant and she is seemingly harassed by an old crone that she kind of sees one day in a restaurant that seems to have taken an interest in her, perhaps because she's pregnant. And of course the boyfriend is like, well, you're just because it's just your hormones because you're pregnant, etc. They go to meet this other couple and have a good time initially, but it seems this witch has followed them and has malicious intent to everyone at this kind of party. Now what will happen with that one? Obviously you have to watch the movie and find out, but not before you've watched the second movie, which actually has the witch as our main character, Masha, played by an actress called Rebekah Kennedy, who looks the literal spitting image of an ex-girlfriend of mine. So it was really weird watching this one, I have to say, because it's not just a passing resemblance, it is an actual kind of almost a double. But that aside, what's the story of this one? So Masha is a youngish witch, we think, and she has this housemate who she seems to be a little bit jealous of. The housemate has got a loving boyfriend, she's kind of got a good job, she seems to have got her life intact, and they seem, somewhat kind of friendly initially, but Masha is clearly kind of somewhat envious of the life that her roommate has, and being a kind of an evil witch, I guess, she ends up kind of hatching a plan to almost single white female her roommates, and what will happen in that one, you'll have to watch the movie to find out. Now, as I mentioned, we do have some connective tissue. The couple that were the hosts of the original movie, the 2 friends that the other one went to visit, feature in this one as well, and they are this one takes place after the original one, and there's some other few nods as well. So it still does feel like kind of one story, because they're not just kind of fly-the-wall characters, they do actually have somewhat of an integral part, which I thought was quite clever actually. Now for me, talking about anthologies, they're not my favourite kind of style of films, to be honest with you, because I never really feel with anthologies you get a really good sense of the characters, because obviously the short running time in each of the vignettes tends to be quite short normally, so you never really get a sense of the characters. But this, I think, for me at least, had a great compromise where we have, 2 stories that are, 45, 50 minutes each. So they're kind of longer, but still kind of quite punchy, but it gives you enough time to, I think, to flesh out the characters, which really makes me as an audience member connect to them, unlike I would do maybe with, anthologies which have more stories. Now that might be somewhat of a personal kind of preference rather than a legitimate kind of critique, I would say, but for me, it kind of worked. It hit that kind of that sweet spot for me, so I can connect with these characters and I feel for them, I empathise with them. But what else can I say that worked in this movie? Now, witches, I have to be honest, I'm a big horror fan, as you probably know, watching this channel, but witches has never really been my kind of favourite kind of horror antagonist, because I feel that they can be a little bit unscary and kind of played somewhat either campy or for jokes, or even when they're kind of played straight, at least sometimes it doesn't feel particularly kind of menacing. But in this one, I feel they do. These kind of witches, because I would say, a witch as a concept, is quite broad to what they can kind of do. You can have a witch be as powerful or as ineffective as the writers want. So it gives them an air of unpredictability compared to something like a werewolf or a vampire, which broadly has to stick to kind of pre-established rules, whilst I think a witch has much more scope to kind of be interpreted by the filmmakers in the way that they want. So with this one, you don't quite know what the witches are going to be capable of. And it gives it this kind of like sense of dread, because you don't quite know what they're able to do and what they're not able to do and what their weaknesses are and things like this. And the movie, on top of that, really uses that to good effect, having some fantastically kind of atmospheric kind of setups and build-ups. And this helps because of the story's slightly longer running time, where we can afford to have these setup sequences and the kind of the building and the tension that you maybe wouldn't have got with a shorter anthology movie. And it was excellent. I thought this was so well done, building of the this foreboding kind of atmosphere, and a lot of it is down to the good character work. A lot of it is down to the actual technical side, the filmmaking, the kind of the lighting, the sound design here, the effects work. It's not overt particularly, but they do a good job with what they've got, I have to say, to making it feel effective. With a little bit of an asterisk, which I'm going to come on to again. But, everything here I felt lent itself to a genuinely unsettling viewing experience, which I kind of thought was really good. The other thing I would say here as well, I think the acting is solid. All the cast members here do an excellent job, I think, of selling you in their kind of characters. And again, it benefits that they are able to, marinate their characters with a slightly longer running time from the regular kind of anthology. But I felt every performance here was spot on. And there is one little asterisk again I'm going to come on to, but I think it was more of a directorial issue. But for the most part, the acting was good. The special effects are they're not over the top, which I think works in this movie's favour. But there are some kind of like sequences and images that I think do seem quite kind of horrific and kind of outlandish in some ways. That was kind of quite fun, and I like the fact that this anthology, the actual way this movie is set out, is we have two stories that are quite different in some ways, but have quite a lot in common at the same time. So obviously, the second story is actually from the perspective of our witch, whilst the original story is kind of like from the perspective of the victims, and we have the witch as a kind of an unknown kind of quantity, which is kind of affecting it. So they kind of have that difference. But the connective tissue here, I think, is quite strong. That this couple that kind of is in both stories feel like they're having a genuine kind of arc with forward kind of momentum, and I found their kind of their journey pretty interesting. I think they're actually at least one of them is a producer on the movie. So that was all pretty good. So to me, this was actually a solidly made movie that I think is, for the most part, pretty good. Let me talk about what doesn't work. The one thing I would say that if I had to have one major critique of this movie is that the movie, when it tries to be scary, sometimes is unintentionally funny, and not in a particularly good way. So we have these kind of witches that when they're kind of doing their spells and what have you, they're kind of contorting their faces and things like this, and it kind of looks silly, to be honest with you. The movie generally works well with kind of the building of the atmosphere, the effects, but there are times here where I think it kind of looks a bit goofy, and not intentionally so. This is not played as a kind of a horror comedy. It's played pretty straight, but there are some sequences here that think, oh my god, that is like, it looks so silly, which obviously then kind of deflates the situation. So this is down to a number of factors. Obviously, this is the way the director intended it, but I don't know if he intended this result. And obviously the actors are kind of performing these weird kind of facial expressions. So again, you might say, oh, it's the acting, but obviously I would say they were probably directed to do this. And the way the movie is cut as well, again, it doesn't do these sequences any favours. And this movie genuinely does have some kind of quite, maybe not kind of like gory scenes or out and out kind of jump scares, but it certainly has some, scary moments. But it is somewhat undercut by some unintentional kind of goofy moments, to be honest with you. I think it kind of like, and some of it does it a little bit too much as well. It's not just one occasion I'd maybe be a bit forgiving of, but it happens quite a few times within this movie as well. Other than that, I will say, I think some of our witches don't really have a lot of clear motivation. Now, I think the first movie, you can kind of get away with it to a certain degree because the witch isn't the main character, isn't the kind of the main character. She's kind of an unknown quantity. So we don't quite know what's kind of going on. So I feel as a kind of antagonistic force, you can kind of get away with it. But the second movie, the character of Masha, she is our main character. The story is from her point of view. And, you know, we can get this sense that she's somewhat malicious, but we don't quite know why. Because her kind of housemate seems genuinely kind of like nice to her, and it almost, this character of Masha seems to deliberately kind of off-rail that for some reason, and I didn't really understand why. So I think the kind of the motivations were a little kind of like hazy with both of them, but particularly kind of noticeable in the second story. And the last thing I would say is both of these short films have kind of an epilogue sequence, which I don't know really worked. I didn't know if they were completely necessary. The second one's a lot longer, and there's actually kind of two separate kind of scenes in it. And I can get maybe one of the scenes because it kind of caps off a character's story up to a certain degree. But I think the second part of it seemed unnecessary and just seemed to be setting up sequel bait. So a little bit more restraint, I think, maybe could have been employed here to make this movie a true classic. But as it stands at the moment, it's a very good and watchable movie with good performances, a great foreboding atmosphere, and some genuinely kind of unsettling sequences and kind of like you know shots in the movie which I think work really well and will kind of leave you thinking about it to a certain degree. So I'll give this one a 7 out of 10. I was tempted to give it an 8 to be honest, but after thinking about it, my critiques, I have to take it down to the couple. So I'm going to give it a 7, but it's a strong 7. It's a strong 7, nearly an 8, but I will say a 7. What do you see this? Have you seen this movie? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.